The crystal stemware caught the chandelier light in fractured rainbows, as I polished each glass with methodical precision, my fingers moving through the familiar rhythm that had defined my last 3 years at Chateau Noir. The cloth made soft, squeaking sounds against the Riedel crystal, a whisper of quality that most people never learn to hear. But I heard everything. Temperature shifts in the cellar. The barely there hiss of a cork beginning to deteriorate. The exact moment a Bordeaux opened from tight to singing. My name is Naomi Suzuki, and at 24, I was already considered a prodigy in a world that usually made women wait decades for respect. Hiroshi Zhao, who owned this temple of fermented grapes, called me his secret weapon. The sommelier who could identify a vintage blindfolded, who remembered every client's preferences, who transformed skeptical collectors into devoted patrons with nothing but knowledge and quiet conviction. Quiet. That word followed me everywhere. Naomi's brilliant, but so quiet. Naomi knows everything about wine, but barely speaks above a whisper. Naomi could run this place, if only she'd learned to assert herself. Tonight's charity wine auction buzzed with the kind of energy that made my chest tight. 200 people in evening wear, voices bouncing off vaulted ceilings, the relentless pressure of being visible. I'd been setting up tasting stations for hours, arranging bottles like soldiers, checking temperature controls obsessively. Anything to avoid the moment when I'd have to actually speak to these people, to perform confidence I didn't feel. Naomi. Hiroshi appeared at my elbow, his weathered face creased with concern. You're repolishing glasses that are already perfect. What's wrong? Everything. Ken might come tonight. My stomach twisted at the thought of my ex-boyfriend, the man who'd spent 8 months systematically dismantling my self-worth with surgical precision. He'd been invited. His new girlfriend Keiko Tanaka was on the auction committee, naturally, because of course Ken would trade up to someone beautiful and assertive and everything I wasn't. I'm fine, I managed, the lie tasting metallic. Just want everything perfect. It already is. You always make it perfect. Hiroshi squeezed my shoulder. Go take a moment before doors open. You look like you're about to shatter. I escaped to the private tasting room, pressing my back against the climate-controlled wine wall, breathing in the familiar scent of oak and thyme. My hands trembled slightly. They always did before big events, before moments that required me to be more than the invisible girl who knew everything about terroir and nothing about existing in the world. 3 years ago, I'd been an apprentice sommelier with imposter syndrome so severe I could barely finish sentences. Then Hiroshi took a chance on a terrified 21-year-old who knew more about wine than people twice her age. He taught me that knowledge was power, that expertise could substitute for confidence. But he couldn't teach me how to believe it when someone like Ken spent months telling me I was boring, forgettable, too intense about wine and not interesting enough about anything else. The evening gown Yumi had forced me to buy hung on my frame like beautiful armor I didn't know how to wear. Deep burgundy silk that cost a month's salary, elegant and sophisticated and utterly wrong for someone who felt most comfortable in the cellar's darkness. Doors opened at 7. By 7:15, the main hall thrummed with controlled chaos. Collectors examining lots, servers circulating with pre-auction tastings, the auctioneer testing his microphone. I moved through my duties on autopilot, explaining vintages to clients who listened with the reverence my knowledge usually commanded. This was the only place I felt powerful. Talking about wine, I could forget to be afraid. Then I saw him. Ken Watanabe walked through the entrance with Keiko on his arm, and the breath left my body in a rush. He looked exactly as he had 6 months ago when he'd told me I was too much work for someone who barely contributed anything interesting to his life. Same sandy hair, same easy smile that had once made me feel chosen and now just made me feel foolish. Keiko was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was petite, vibrant where I was muted, laughing loudly at something Ken said while I stood frozen behind a tasting station like a deer in headlights. The 2015 Chateau Margaux, a client was saying. What are your notes? I couldn't remember, couldn't think. Ken's gaze was sweeping the room, and any second he'd see me, and I'd have to endure that particular smile, the one that said he'd moved on to someone better while I was still exactly where he'd left me. My feet moved before my brain caught up, carrying me away from the station, away from exposure. I needed air. I needed to not exist for 5 minutes. I collided with someone solid as a wall. Careful. The voice was low, controlled, edged with something that made my survival instincts wake up screaming. I looked up, way up, into the face of a man who made the entire room feel suddenly smaller. He was perhaps 30, with dark eyes that assessed me with the kind of focus that suggested he missed nothing. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, the kind of dangerous elegance that made expensive tailoring look like camouflage rather than costume. "I'm sorry," I breathed, stepping back. "I wasn't watching where—" "You're running from something." Not a question. His gaze flicked past me to where Ken and Keiko were now talking to the auction organizers. Or someone. How did he know that? I didn't know this man. I'd never seen him at Chateau Noir events, and I knew every serious collector in the city. He carried himself with the kind of authority that suggested he owned things, possibly including the building we were standing in. "The gentleman in the gray suit," he continued, his voice almost conversational. "He's looking for you." Ken was scanning the crowd, his expression shifting to something calculating when he spotted me, or would, any second. The familiar panic rose in my throat, the certainty that I'd stumble over words, that he'd make some cutting observation about how I'd clearly been pining for him while he'd moved on, that Keiko would look at me with pity that was somehow worse than contempt. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. "Can we leave holding hands?" My face was burning. I want him jealous. The stranger went absolutely still. For 3 heartbeats that felt eternal, he simply looked at me, through me, with an intensity that made me wonder if I'd just made a catastrophic mistake. Men like this didn't help trembling sommeliers escape awkward social situations. Men like this probably had people killed for less presumption than I'd just demonstrated. Then his hand extended, palm up, waiting. "Your name?" "Naomi Suzuki." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Naomi." He said it like he was tasting wine, testing the flavor. "I'm Kazuki Takahashi." The name meant nothing to me. Should it? His hand was still extended, patient and terrifying in equal measure. I placed my fingers in his palm. His hand closed around mine with a confidence that suggested he did this often. Claimed things, people, moments. His skin was warm, calloused in unexpected places. Not the soft hands of someone who'd never worked, despite the obvious wealth in his tailoring. "Walk with me," Kazuki said. Not a question, not quite a command. Something in between that made my feet move without conscious decision. We crossed the auction hall with his hand wrapped around mine, and I felt the exact moment Ken noticed. Felt his attention sharpen, his posture change. Felt Keiko's gaze land on us like a physical weight. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt like I'd just made a deal with something far more dangerous than my wounded pride. Kazuki guided me through the crowd, with the ease of someone accustomed to people moving out of his way. His stride was measured, controlled, and I had to take 2 steps for every one of his just to keep pace. He didn't look back at Ken, didn't acknowledge the attention we were drawing, though everyone was definitely noticing us now. Me, specifically. The invisible sommelier who apparently knew the most striking man in the room. We reached the veranda overlooking the city lights, and only then did he release my hand. I immediately felt the loss of that anchoring pressure. "That was your ex-boyfriend." Another statement that wasn't quite a question. "Yes." I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling exposed. "I'm sorry. That was presumptuous and stupid, and you probably think I'm strategic." He leaned against the railing, studying me with that unsettling focus. You saw a solution to a problem and executed it. That's not stupid. The validation felt strange coming from a stranger. I risked a glance back through the glass doors. Ken was pretending not to watch us while very obviously watching us. Keiko looked annoyed. He's still watching, Kazuki observed. Does it help? Making him jealous? Did it? I thought about Ken's expression. The flicker of something. Surprise, maybe possessiveness he had no right to feel anymore. And realized I didn't care as much as I'd thought I would. What I cared about was that for 5 minutes, I'd felt powerful. Like someone who could make choices instead of just enduring them. I don't know, I admitted. I just panicked. I didn't want to face him alone and pathetic. You're not pathetic. Kazuki's voice carried absolute certainty. Uncomfortable in your own body, maybe. Uncertain how to weaponize your obvious intelligence. But not pathetic. I blinked at him. You don't know me. I know you're a sommelier. I heard you explaining the Margot to that collector before you ran. You spoke with more authority than I've heard from people with twice your experience. He tilted his head slightly. I also know that the moment you stopped talking about wine, you folded into yourself. Became smaller. Like you're afraid of taking up space. The accuracy of his observation made my throat tight. And you deduced all that from watching me for 5 minutes? I'm good at reading people. Something dark flickered in his expression. It's necessary in my line of work. Which is? Complicated. He straightened from the railing, and I was reminded again of how much larger he was, not just physically, but in presence. He filled space effortlessly. Let's make this simple, Naomi. You need to not feel pathetic. I need someone to play a specific role. We can help each other. My pulse jumped. What kind of role? My family is very traditional. They've been pressuring me to marry, specifically to accept an arranged match that would benefit certain business interests. His voice held distaste. I have no intention of marrying anyone, let alone someone chosen for strategic value. But they won't stop unless I demonstrate I'm already involved with someone. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend. For 4 months. Long enough to convince my family I'm serious about someone inappropriate for their plans. He pulled out his phone, typed something. In exchange, I'll ensure your ex-boyfriend regrets every choice that led him to undervalue you. A text arrived on my own phone, a number I didn't recognize. When I looked up, Kazuki was watching me with that predator's patience. Think about it, he said. But don't take too long. I have a family dinner next week where I'll need to bring my committed girlfriend, or face another lecture about duty and tradition. He moved toward the doors, then paused. For what it's worth, Naomi, you should stop making yourself smaller. The world will take up as much space as you give it. Stop giving it yours. Then he was gone, disappearing into the auction crowd, with the same purposeful grace he'd shown earlier. I stood alone on the veranda, my phone clutched in one hand, my heart hammering. What had just happened? I'd asked a stranger to fake date me for 5 minutes of ego protection, and he'd countered with a 4-month arrangement that sounded like something from a romance novel. Except romance novels didn't feature men who moved like weapons, who assessed you with eyes that saw too much, who made casual observations about authority and space that suggested he spent a lot of time thinking about power dynamics. My phone buzzed again. Another text from that unknown number. The 2015 Margot. Your notes would have been blackcurrant, graphite, violets. Tannic structure suggesting another decade of aging potential. You knew that. Don't let fear make you forget what you know. I stared at the message. He'd been listening that carefully, had remembered not just that I was knowledgeable, but the specific vintage I'd been asked about before I fled. How did you know about the Margot? I texted back. I was standing 3 feet away when you froze. I pay attention. A pause, then, Think about my offer. I promise. Whatever you're afraid of, I'm more afraid of an arranged marriage to someone who sees me as a business transaction. That shouldn't have been reassuring. It was. Maybe because it made him human instead of just intimidating. Or maybe because I recognized that fear of being reduced to function instead of seen as person. I didn't know Kazuki Takahashi. Didn't know what he did for work, or why someone who moved like he did would need a fake girlfriend. But I knew what it felt like to be invisible while simultaneously too exposed. And I knew that for 5 minutes tonight, holding his hand, I'd felt like someone who could face Ken without crumbling. 4 months. What would 4 months of pretending look like with a man who noticed which vintage flustered me? I spent 3 days thinking about Kazuki's offer. 3 days of serving wine to clients, while my mind spiraled through every possible consequence of accepting help from a stranger, whose last name I'd had to Google, only to find nothing beyond a few mentions in business journals that described him as a private investor with diversified interests. In other words, nothing. Kazuki Takahashi existed, but his digital footprint was suspiciously minimal for someone who clearly had significant wealth. "You're distracted," Yumi said, catching me staring at my phone for the 3rd time during our Friday inventory check. She leaned against the wine racks, arms crossed. What happened at the auction? Everything and nothing. I'd successfully avoided Ken. He'd left early, probably uncomfortable being in the same space as his boring ex-girlfriend, who'd apparently found someone far more interesting. But I couldn't stop thinking about Kazuki's text, about the way he'd read the situation instantly, about his offer that felt both terrifying and tempting. "Someone asked me to do something," I said carefully. "Something that would help us both, but feels complicated. Is this someone tall, expensive-looking, and watched you like you were the only person in that entire auction hall?" Yumi's eyebrow arched. "Because I saw you leave holding hands with a man who looked like he could buy and sell this place without noticing the charge." Heat flooded my face. "You saw that?" "Everyone saw that, including Ken, who spent the rest of the evening looking like he'd swallowed glass." She moved closer, voice dropping. "Naomi, who was he?" "His name is Kazuki Takahashi. He—" I stopped. What could I even say? "He wants me to pretend to be his girlfriend for 4 months." Yumi's eyes went wide. "Pretend to be— why?" I explained the family pressure, the arranged marriage, the offer to make Ken regret leaving me. With every word, Yumi's expression shifted from shock to concern to something calculating. "This sounds insane," she said finally, "and possibly dangerous. You don't know this man." "I know, but—" I tried to articulate the feeling that had been building since Tuesday night. For 5 minutes I felt powerful, like someone who made choices instead of just surviving them. What if I could feel like that for 4 months? What if he's secretly a serial killer? Then at least I'd die having taken a risk for once. The words came out sharper than I intended. "Yumi, I've spent 3 years being careful, being invisible, making myself smaller so I don't threaten anyone or take up too much space. And what did it get me? A boyfriend who left me for someone louder and more confident? And a life where my greatest achievement is knowing which Bordeaux pairs with duck? Hey." Yumi grabbed my shoulders. "Your knowledge is not nothing. You're brilliant at what you do. But only at what I do." The admission hurt. The moment I have to exist as a person outside these walls, I freeze. I become forgettable. And I'm tired of being forgettable, Yumi. My phone buzzed. A text from Kazuki. "My family dinner is Sunday at 7 p.m. I need an answer by tomorrow. No pressure, but I should warn you. My mother is relentless. If I show up alone again, she'll have me engaged to her best friend's daughter by dessert." Despite everything, I smiled. There was something endearing about the way he presented his problem. Direct, slightly self-deprecating, honest about his desperation. "What would I have to do?" I texted back. His response came immediately. Be yourself. Talk about wine if you're nervous. My family appreciates expertise. Hold my hand at strategic moments. Let me introduce you as my girlfriend. Help me convince them I'm serious about someone they won't approve of. Why wouldn't they approve of me? A pause. Then, you're not from the right kind of family. You work for a living. You have your own ambitions beyond supporting a husband's career. Basically, everything that makes you interesting makes you inappropriate in their world. Something about that description made my chest feel tight, but not with hurt, with recognition. I'd spent 8 months with Ken trying to be appropriate, trying to be less obsessed with wine, more interested in his finance career, more socially graceful. And it had never been enough. Maybe being inappropriate was exactly what I needed to try. I'll do it, I texted, but we need to establish ground rules. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, name them. I thought carefully before responding. 1. No physical intimacy beyond hand-holding, and whatever's necessary to look convincing. 2. I still work full-time at Chateau Noir. This arrangement doesn't interfere with my career. 3. After 4 months, we walk away clean. No drama, no complications. 4. You don't interfere in my life beyond what's necessary for the arrangement. Agreed, Kazuki replied. My rules. 1. Complete honesty between us. I need to trust you won't blow our cover. 2. You attend family events as needed. No backing out. 3. You let me handle your ex-boyfriend situation my way. 4. When this ends, you don't tell anyone the truth. My family can't know this was strategic. Fair enough. I took a breath and typed, when do we start? Tomorrow. Lunch at Marcello's on 5th Street, 1 p.m. We need to coordinate our story before facing my family. And Naomi, wear something comfortable. This is a strategy session, not a performance. I stared at the message, my pulse racing. I'd just agreed to fake date a stranger for 4 months, to lie to his family, to play a role I had no idea how to inhabit, to trust someone whose background I couldn't verify and whose intentions I could only guess at. You're doing it, Yumi said, reading my expression. You're actually doing this insane thing. I'm doing this insane thing, I confirmed, feeling equal parts terrified and exhilarated. Then I'm running a background check on Kazuki Takahashi before you meet him alone. Yumi pulled out her phone. Because if you're going to make spectacularly bad decisions, someone needs to make sure you don't end up in pieces in a dumpster. That's reassuring. That's friendship. She was already typing. Also, we're going shopping. If you're fake dating a man who can afford custom tailoring, you need at least one outfit that doesn't make you look like you're apologizing for existing. Saturday afternoon found me at Marcello's 20 minutes early, wearing a simple black dress that Yumi had approved as elegant without trying too hard. The restaurant was the kind of place where waiters knew your name, and the wine list required actual expertise to navigate. I'd been here once before, for an industry event, where I'd spent the entire evening hiding behind my professional knowledge. Kazuki arrived exactly at 1, and I experienced a visceral reminder of why I'd found him so overwhelming at the auction. In daylight, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, he looked less like he'd stepped out of a boardroom and more like casual power personified. Several women tracked his movement through the restaurant. He didn't seem to notice. Naomi, he slid into the seat across from me with economical grace. You're early. I'm always early. It's a control thing. The admission slipped out before I could filter it. Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. I appreciate people who manage their anxiety productively. Most of my acquaintances just drink through it. I tried that once. Threw up on a client's shoes. Decided I'm better off with punctuality. His laugh was surprised and genuine. I'm already more confident about this arrangement. You're refreshingly honest. About embarrassing myself? It's a gift. We ordered. He insisted I choose the wine, which felt like a test I desperately wanted to pass. I selected a Côte du Rhône that was sophisticated without being pretentious, then immediately second-guessed myself until the sommelier nodded approval. "Tell me about your family," I said once we were alone with our wine. "What am I walking into tomorrow?" Kazuki's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "My mother, Akiko. My father, Takeshi. Though he'll likely be absent, he usually is. My younger sister, Hana, who will either love you or test you mercilessly, depending on her mood." He paused. "They're traditional. Old money. They believe in duty, obligation, strategic marriages. My father built a business empire by treating relationships like transactions. My mother perfected the art of appearing graceful while controlling everything. And you?" "I built my own empire doing things they don't ask about." His voice was neutral, but something dangerous lurked beneath. "They know I'm successful. They don't want details about how." "Should I be worried about those details?" "Probably." He met my eyes directly. "I'm not a good man, Naomi. I'm effective, efficient, and occasionally ruthless. But I keep my word, and I promise, whatever I am, you're safe from it." The thing was, I believed him. Maybe because his honesty felt like its own kind of protection. Or maybe because I was tired of men who lied with smiles and pretty words. "Tell me about Ken," Kazuki said. "What did he do to make you willing to accept help from a stranger?" The question caught me off guard. I sipped my wine, buying time. He didn't hit me or anything dramatic. He just eroded me, slowly. Comments about how I was too quiet at parties. How my obsession with wine was boring to normal people. How I needed to be more interesting, more engaging, more everything except what I was. My voice dropped. By the end, I agreed with him. I thought I was the problem. You weren't. How do you know? Because people who are actually boring don't light up the way you do when discussing wine. Because expertise is attractive, and confidence is learned, and he mistook your social anxiety for absence of substance. Kazuki leaned forward slightly. He was threatened by how much you knew, by the fact that you were better at something than he could ever be. So he made you smaller until you forgot your own dimensions. No one had ever articulated it quite that way. The accuracy made my throat tight. "Thank you," I managed. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what I do to him." There was something in his tone, a dark promise that should have scared me, and instead made me feel oddly protected. We spent the next 2 hours constructing our story. We'd met at a private wine tasting 3 months ago. I'd been consulting. He'd been investing. He'd been impressed by my expertise. I'd been charmed by his knowledge of obscure vintages. We'd been quietly dating ever since, keeping it private because his family situation was complicated. The lies came easier than I expected. Maybe because they were built on partial truths. Maybe because Kazuki was the kind of collaborator who anticipated questions I hadn't thought to ask. "One more thing," he said as we were leaving. "Tomorrow night my mother will test you. She'll say something designed to make you feel inferior or uncertain. Don't take the bait. What should I do instead? Be exactly who you are when you're talking about wine. Confident, knowledgeable. Someone who doesn't need her approval because you already know your own worth." He held the door for me. "Can you do that?" I thought about the version of myself that existed in the cellar at Chateau Noir. The woman who could blind taste a Burgundy and identify the specific village, who remembered client preferences years later, who'd turned skeptical collectors into loyal patrons through pure expertise. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." "Good." Kazuki's hand found mine, and I realized we were performing already, just in case anyone was watching. Because tomorrow, you're going to help me convince the most judgmental woman I know that I'm serious about someone completely inappropriate. And Naomi? Yes? I chose you specifically because you're inappropriate in all the right ways. Sunday evening arrived wrapped in October chill and my own spiraling anxiety. I'd changed outfits 4 times before settling on a navy dress that Yumi insisted made me look intimidatingly competent, though I mostly felt like I was wearing a costume. My hands were steady as I applied minimal makeup, but my stomach churned with the particular nausea that came from walking deliberately into a situation designed to expose me. Kazuki picked me up at 6:30 in a car that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. Sleek, black, eerily quiet. He looked unfairly composed in a dark suit, but I caught the tension in his jaw as he held the passenger door open. "Nervous?" I asked, once we were moving through evening traffic. "Terrified." His honesty surprised me. My mother can detect deception at 50 paces. She'll know we're lying unless we commit completely. So we commit completely. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. We've practiced our story. We know the key details. I'll just channel every ounce of false confidence I've ever mustered for wine presentations and direct it toward convincing your family I'm madly in love with you. Kazuki glanced at me, something unreadable crossing his features. "Have you ever been madly in love with anyone?" The question felt dangerous. "No. I've been quietly in love, carefully in love. The kind where you fold yourself smaller and smaller until there's barely anything left to love." I looked out the window at city lights blurring past. "Why? Have you?" "No." His voice was flat. "I've been strategically involved, conveniently attached, never anything that required actual vulnerability." Then we're both faking something we've never experienced. The realization should have been discouraging. Instead, it felt oddly equalizing. 2 people performing an emotion neither of us fully understood. The Takahashi estate was not a house. It was a statement. Traditional Japanese architecture merged with modern luxury, sprawling across grounds that suggested the family had owned this land for generations. Stone lanterns lined the driveway. A koi pond reflected the house's elegant lines. Everything whispered old money and older expectations. "Last chance to run," Kazuki said quietly as we approached the entrance. "I don't run anymore." I threaded my fingers through his, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "Let's go convince your mother you have terrible taste in women." His laugh was brief but genuine. "She's going to hate you on principle. Try not to take it personally." The interior was exactly as I'd imagined. Minimalist elegance, priceless art displayed with casual confidence, the kind of space where you were afraid to touch anything. A woman in her late 50s appeared in the foyer, and I knew immediately this was Akiko Takahashi. She moved with the grace of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world, dark eyes assessing me with surgical precision. "Kazuki." Her voice was cultured, controlled. "You're late." "By 3 minutes, mother. Allow me to introduce Naomi Suzuki." His hand pressed against my lower back, subtle support. "Naomi, my mother, Akiko Takahashi." I bowed slightly, remembering Kazuki's coaching about proper respect. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Takahashi. Your home is beautiful." "Suzuki." She repeated my surname like she was cataloging it. "I don't believe I'm familiar with that family." "My family isn't particularly notable," I replied evenly, channeling the version of myself that could face down skeptical collectors. "My grandmother immigrated from Japan 50 years ago. She worked in restaurants until she could afford her own small place. She taught me that knowledge and dedication matter more than pedigree." Something flickered in Akiko's expression. Surprise, maybe, that I hadn't immediately apologized for my background. "And what is it you do, Miss Suzuki?" "I'm a sommelier. I work at Chateau Noir." "Ah." The single syllable carried volumes. "How enterprising. Kazuki, your father is in his study. Dinner will be ready shortly." She swept away, leaving us in the foyer with the clear implication that I'd already been measured and found wanting. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Well, I murmured. That went exactly as terribly as expected. Actually, that went better than expected. Kazuki's hand slid from my back to take my hand again. She usually makes people cry within the first 2 minutes. You held your ground. I didn't cry. That's my bar for success? In this house, absolutely. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as polite conversation. Akiko asked pointed questions about my education, my family, my long-term plans, each one designed to highlight exactly how inappropriate I was for her son. Kazuki's father, Takeshi, was present in body but absent in attention, occasionally grunting agreement with his wife while checking his phone. Only Kazuki's sister Hana seemed genuinely interested in me, though her interest felt more like a cat toying with prey than actual warmth. So, Naomi, Hana said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. How did you and my brother meet? I didn't realize Kazuki even liked wine. I launched into our rehearsed story, grateful for the hours we'd spent coordinating details. Met at a private tasting. Connected over a discussion of Burgundy terroir. Started seeing each other quietly because Kazuki valued privacy about his personal life. Fascinating. Akiko's tone suggested it was anything but. And how long did you say this has been going on? 3 months, Kazuki answered smoothly. We've been taking it slowly. Naomi's career is demanding, and I respect her dedication to her work. How progressive. Akiko took a deliberate sip of wine, a Bordeaux I recognized as vastly overpriced and underaged. Though I suppose modern relationships operate differently than traditional arrangements. The barb was clear. You're not good enough for a traditional arrangement. I should have let it go. Should have smiled and nodded and played the agreeable girlfriend. Instead, I heard myself saying, Actually, Mrs. Takahashi, I think the wine is ready. Would you like me to decant it for another hour? The 09 Margot really needs time to open up properly. Dead silence. Akiko stared at me like I just criticized her outfit. Kazuki's hand found mine under the table, squeezing in what might have been warning or support. Are you suggesting, Akiko said carefully, that I don't know how to serve wine properly in my own home? Not at all. I kept my voice calm, professional. I'm suggesting that this particular vintage is drinking young, and your guests would appreciate it more if given adequate breathing time. But of course, it's entirely your preference. For 5 excruciating seconds, no one moved. Then Takeshi looked up from his phone. She's right, Akiko. The 09 needs decanting. I told you that when you insisted on serving it tonight. Something that might have been respect flickered in Akiko's expression before her mask reasserted itself. How observant, Miss Suzuki. Kazuki, why don't you and your sommelier friend decant the wine in the kitchen? I'm sure she can teach you something about proper service. We escaped to the kitchen, where I finally allowed myself to collapse against the counter. I just criticized your mother's wine service, at a dinner designed to make her like me. I'm an idiot. You're magnificent. Kazuki was actually smiling, a real smile, not the careful masks I'd seen him wear all evening. Do you know what she said when I told her I was seeing someone? That no girl worth having would waste time on me unless she was after money or status. But you just humiliated her about wine in front of my father, which means you're clearly not trying to ingratiate yourself. That's your bar for magnificent? Accidental rudeness? Strategic honesty. He pulled the wine from the fridge, examining the label. You were right, by the way. This does need another hour. How did you know? The 09 Margot had a particularly hot growing season. The tannins need more time to integrate. Your mother probably bought it based on reputation, without consulting someone who actually understands Bordeaux vintages. I found a proper decanter, poured carefully. I wasn't trying to show off. I just can't watch good wine being served badly. I know. That's what made it perfect. Kazuki leaned against the counter beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth. You stopped performing. You just were yourself. Someone who knows more about wine than anyone in that dining room. Someone who doesn't apologize for expertise. Your mother hates me. She's threatened by you. There's a difference. His voice dropped lower. She spent 30 years perfecting the art of making people feel inferior. You walked in wearing a dress that probably cost less than her shoes, and you didn't flinch when she tested you. Do you understand how rare that is? I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that my defensiveness wasn't a catastrophic failure. But years of making myself smaller were hard to overcome in one evening. Kazuki, I said quietly, what are we really doing here? You're clearly capable of handling your mother without my help. Why involve someone you barely know in your family drama? He was silent for a long moment, studying the wine as it breathed. Do you know what my mother said when I refused the arranged marriage she'd planned? That I'd end up alone because I was too controlled, too calculating, too incapable of actual emotion to make anyone fall in love with me. His jaw tightened. She wasn't entirely wrong, but I wanted to prove that someone could choose me, even if it was strategic, even if it was temporary. I wanted to show her that I'm capable of connection, even if I have to pay for it. The confession hurt to hear. Kazuki, I know this sounds pathetic. A grown man needing to prove something to his mother. But she spent my entire life treating me like I'm broken. Like my inability to perform emotion the way she expects means I'm fundamentally deficient. He looked at me directly. You're here because you understand what it means to be judged insufficient by people who matter. And I thought maybe we could protect each other from that, even if just temporarily. I understood then. This wasn't about convincing his family of anything. It was about convincing himself that he was capable of the kind of connection his mother insisted he lacked. I'm here because you saw me freeze in front of my ex-boyfriend and offered me an escape, I said. Not because I'm being paid or manipulated. I'm here because for the first time in years, someone looked at me and didn't see something that needed fixing. You saw someone capable of holding her own, even when she couldn't see it herself. Does that mean you'll stay? For 4 months. I held his gaze steadily. And after that, we'll reassess. But Kazuki, you're not broken. You're just honest about your limitations. That's not the same thing. He studied me for a moment, something vulnerable flickering beneath his usual control. Then he straightened, picked up the decanter. Come on. Let's give my mother properly aged wine and see if she can admit you were right. She didn't admit it, of course. But when Takeshi tasted the decanted Margaux and declared it vastly improved, Akiko's expression suggested she was reassessing me from obviously unsuitable to potentially complicated threat. By the time Kazuki drove me home, I was exhausted from performing, from defending, from existing in a space where I was perpetually being evaluated. But I'd survived. I hadn't cried, or apologized, or made myself smaller. I'd held my ground. Same time next Sunday? Kazuki asked as we pulled up to my building. Your mother really requires weekly dinners? She requires weekly opportunities to break my girlfriend's spirit. But I suspect you can handle it. He walked me to my door, hand resting at my lower back in that gesture I was beginning to find comforting. Thank you for tonight. For not running when she deployed her full arsenal. Thank you for not warning me exactly how terrifying she'd be. If I'd known, I might have reconsidered. His laugh was quiet, genuine. Would you have? I thought about it honestly. About the way Ken used to make me feel insufficient. About the pattern of making myself smaller to fit other people's expectations. About the strange relief I'd felt tonight when Kazuki told me I was magnificent for being exactly myself. No, I admitted. I don't think I would have. Good. He hesitated, then said, Naomi, what you said earlier, about me not being broken, did you mean it? Every word. Something shifted in his expression, became less guarded. Then I'll see you next Sunday. Try not to overthink everything that happened tonight. That's like asking me not to breathe. I know. He smiled. Breathe anyway. I watched him drive away, then collapsed on my couch with my phone, immediately texting Yumi. Survived dinner with the most terrifying woman alive. She hates me. Pretty sure I made it worse by correcting her wine service. But Kazuki thinks I'm magnificent, so maybe I didn't completely fail. Her response, you corrected his mother's wine service? Naomi. You beautiful disaster. I laughed despite my exhaustion, because she was right. I was a disaster. But for the first time in years, I was a disaster who felt like she'd earned the right to exist exactly as she was. The next 3 weeks established a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. Weekly dinners at the Takahashi estate where Akiko tested me with increasingly creative psychological warfare. Occasional public appearances where Kazuki introduced me to business associates, whose names I forgot immediately. And strangely, genuinely, moments where our arrangement started feeling less like performance and more like partnership. Kazuki learned I couldn't function before coffee, and started arriving at my apartment with perfectly prepared cappuccinos on mornings when we had appearances scheduled. I learned he actually did love wine, not with my technical obsession, but with genuine appreciation, and started bringing bottles from Chateau Noir's collection for us to share after particularly difficult family dinners. Ken called once, 2 weeks into our arrangement. I was at Kazuki's penthouse. He'd insisted I familiarize myself with his space since his family might question why I never visited, when my phone rang with a number I'd deleted but still recognized. Don't answer it, Kazuki said from across his living room, where he was reviewing contracts that probably represented more money than I'd see in a lifetime. I wasn't planning to, but my hand hovered over the phone anyway. Muscle memory of 8 months spent always being available, warring with my new determination to prioritize my own peace. The call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text. Saw you at the Bellamy Gallery last week. You looked good. Different. Can we talk? What does he want? Kazuki had appeared at my shoulder without me noticing, reading over my arm with that unsettling focus. To talk, apparently. I deleted the message. Probably wants to feel better about himself by confirming I'm still pining for him. Are you? No. The realization surprised me. I thought I would be. Thought seeing him with Keiko would destroy me. But mostly I just feel relieved. Like I dodged something that would have slowly killed the parts of me that actually matter. Good. Kazuki plucked the phone from my hand, typed something. Then let's make sure he understands you've moved on. What did you just send? He showed me the screen. I'm seeing someone who actually values my expertise instead of resenting it. Please lose this number. Kazuki, that's honest. He returned my phone. He doesn't get to interrupt your life whenever he feels like performing concern. Block him. I did, feeling simultaneously empowered and terrified by the finality of it. Has anyone ever told you you're slightly terrifying when you decide to help people? Frequently. It's part of my charm. He returned to his contracts. Also, my mother called this afternoon. She wants you to attend some charity gala with me next month. Something about introducing you to the family friends who matter. That sounds like a trap. It absolutely is. She's going to parade every eligible woman my age in front of me, hoping one of them will make you feel inadequate enough to break up with me. He glanced up, expression unreadable. Are you going to let her? Make me feel inadequate? Probably. She's very good at it. I sat beside him on the obscenely comfortable couch. Make me break up with you? No. I agreed to 4 months. I keep my commitments. Even when they're harder than anticipated? Especially then. I hesitated, then asked, Is this harder than you anticipated? I mean, the arrangement. Kazuki set down his contracts, giving me his full attention. Yes, but not in the ways I expected. What does that mean? It means I thought this would be simple. Play a role, convince my family, move on with minimal emotional investment. His voice dropped lower. But you keep surprising me. The way you stood up to my mother. The way you correct everyone's wine knowledge without apology. The way you text me photos of terrible customer reviews from Chateau Noir because you know I find incompetent criticism entertaining. I do that because you're the only person who appreciates how ridiculous some of these reviews are. I pulled out my phone, found yesterday's gem. This Pinot Noir tastes too much like grapes. 1 star. See? Pure comedy. His laugh was surprised and genuine. The real one I was learning to distinguish from his polite performance laugh. That's exactly what I mean. You share things with me. Not because you're trying to impress me or maintain the arrangement, just because you think I'd find them amusing. Is that a problem? I don't know yet. He studied me with that intensity that always made me feel simultaneously visible and evaluated. The arrangement was supposed to be strategic, mutually beneficial. But somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I've started thinking about you as more than just the person helping me avoid an arranged marriage. My pulse jumped. Kazuki, don't panic. I'm not saying I'm in love with you, or planning to extend our arrangement indefinitely. His voice was carefully controlled. I'm saying I like you, as a person, as someone I want to spend time with beyond our required appearances, and I don't know what to do with that. Honesty deserved honesty. I like you too. You're arrogant and intimidating and occasionally terrifying, but you also remember which coffee I prefer, and you listen when I explain why terroir matters, and you've never once made me feel like my knowledge is something I should apologize for. I met his eyes directly. So yes, this is more complicated than I anticipated. But I don't think that's necessarily bad. What if it becomes bad? Then we deal with it when it happens. But Kazuki, what's the point of protecting ourselves from complications if it means never experiencing anything real? He was silent for a long moment, processing. Then, you're unexpectedly wise for someone who spends most social interactions looking like you want to disappear. I spend most social interactions desperately calculating exit strategies. It's exhausting. I stretched out on his couch, finally relaxing slightly. This is the first time in years I've felt comfortable enough with someone to not constantly plan escape routes. Is that why you keep falling asleep on my couch? I fell asleep once, maybe twice. 3 times, but who was counting? 3 times. Last week you conked out during a documentary about French vineyards. I had to carry you to the guest room. His expression was unreadable. You barely woke up, just mumbled something about Burgundy and went back to sleep. Heat flooded my face. I'm so sorry. That's incredibly inappropriate. Stop. He cut off my spiral. It wasn't inappropriate. It was nice, having someone comfortable enough in my space to just fall asleep. No performance, no effort, just existing. Your standards for nice are concerningly low. Or my experience with genuine comfort is concerningly limited. He stood, stretched in a way that revealed exactly how much time he spent maintaining that physique. Come on. I promised you dinner. And there's a new wine bar in Tribeca I want your opinion on. We spent the evening tasting obscure natural wines while I explained why some were brilliant and others were pretentious garbage. Kazuki listened with the focus he brought to everything, asking thoughtful questions that proved he actually cared about my answers. By the time he dropped me home, I was exhausted and content in equal measure. Same time Sunday? He asked. Our new ritual? Wouldn't miss it. What fresh hell has your mother planned? She's invited my ex-girlfriend to dinner, the one she wanted me to marry 3 years ago. His expression was carefully neutral. Apparently she thinks reintroducing past options will make me realize I'm settling with you. Is she going to be right? About me settling? Kazuki tilted my chin up with one finger, forcing eye contact. Naomi, I've dated women who looked like models and had trust funds larger than small countries' GDPs. Not one of them ever made me laugh the way you do when you're destroying someone's terrible wine opinion. Not one of them ever texted me at 2 a.m. because they needed to rant about oak barrel alternatives in modern vinification. And not one of them ever fell asleep on my couch because they felt safe enough to stop performing. So, you're not settling? I'm realizing I spent years pursuing exactly the wrong things. His thumb brushed my cheek briefly before he pulled back. See you Sunday. Try not to overthink everything I just said. That's like asking me not to. Breathe, I know. He smiled. Breathe anyway. I did breathe, all the way up to my apartment, through my preparation for bed, lying awake thinking about the way he'd looked at me when he said I made him laugh. About the fact that our arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but was starting to feel dangerously permanent. Sunday's dinner was exactly the psychological warfare Kazuki had predicted. His ex-girlfriend, Rina Yoshida, was everything I wasn't. Tall, elegant, effortlessly confident in a way that suggested she'd never questioned her right to exist in spaces like this. Akiko introduced her with barely concealed triumph, watching my reaction like a scientist observing an experiment. Rina? Kazuki said, his voice pleasant but flat. This is my girlfriend, Naomi Suzuki. Naomi, Rina, and I dated briefly several years ago before we both realized we wanted entirely different things from life. How lovely to meet you. Rina's smile was perfect, practiced. Kazuki has excellent taste. Though I have to ask, Suzuki? I don't believe I'm familiar with your family. My family isn't socially prominent, I replied, channeling every ounce of the confidence I pretended to have. My grandmother taught me that actual achievement matters more than inherited status. She built a successful restaurant from nothing. I'm trying to do the same with my career. How admirable. The word dripped with condescension. And what is it you do again? I'm a sommelier. I met her eyes steadily, refusing to blink first. I identify wines blindfolded, consult for private collections, and recently helped the Bellamy Gallery select their wine program. But please, tell me about your work. Kazuki mentioned you're in finance? I manage my family's portfolio. Nothing as glamorous as wine consulting, I'm sure. Actually, portfolio management sounds fascinating. What's your current strategy given market volatility? Kazuki's question was mild, but I caught the glint of something sharp in his eyes. Rina launched into an explanation that made it clear she understood money, but had never actually worked for any of it. Kazuki listened with polite disinterest, his hand finding mine under the table and squeezing gently. A reminder that we were a team, performing a role, united against his mother's machinations. Halfway through dinner, Akiko made her move. Rina was just telling me about her engagement to the Matsuda heir. Such a perfect match. 2 established families, shared values, similar backgrounds. She looked at me meaningfully. The kind of union that builds legacies. Congratulations, Rina, I said genuinely. I hope you'll be very happy. Thank you. I'm sure you understand what it means to marry well, to elevate one's station through strategic partnership. The barb was delivered sweetly, but it landed sharp. Actually, I don't. I set down my wine glass carefully. I understand what it means to work for everything you have, to earn respect through competence rather than inheritance, to build something from nothing, because that's all you were given. I looked at Akiko directly. Mrs. Takahashi, with respect, I'll never understand your world of strategic marriages and calculated alliances, but I understand dedication, expertise, and choosing partners based on actual connection rather than social advantage. If that makes me inappropriate for your son, then I suppose we're perfectly matched in our inappropriateness. Silence. Absolute, crystalline silence. Then Takeshi laughed. Actually laughed. Loud and unexpected. She's got spirit, Akiko. More than you gave her credit for. Akiko's expression was unreadable, but something flickered there. Not approval exactly, but reassessment. Indeed. Tell me, Miss Suzuki, how do you see this relationship progressing? What are your long-term intentions regarding my son? The question was a trap. Say something vague, and I'd prove I was unserious. Say something specific, and I'd reveal the arrangement was strategic rather than romantic. I intend, I said carefully, to keep being exactly who I am. Someone who challenges Kazuki intellectually, who doesn't pretend to understand finance, but absolutely knows the difference between Premier Cru and Grand Cru Burgundy, who makes him laugh when he's taking himself too seriously. I glanced at Kazuki, whose expression had gone soft in a way I'd never seen. If that's enough for him, then we'll figure out the rest as we go. If it's not, then we'll know we tried. And you're comfortable with that uncertainty? Akiko pressed. More comfortable than I'd be with certainty built on pretending to be someone I'm not. After dinner, as Kazuki drove me home in charged silence, I finally asked, "Did I just ruin everything? That was too honest, wasn't it? I should have been more diplomatic." You were perfect. He cut off my spiral. Do you know what my mother said to me while you were helping Hana clear dishes? That you're either genuinely in love with me or the best actress she's ever seen. And that either way, she respects you for not backing down when tested. She respects me? After I basically told her her values mean nothing to me? She respects that you stood your ground without becoming cruel, that you defended yourself without attacking Rina, who was absolutely trying to make you feel inferior. He pulled over suddenly, putting the car in park though we were blocks from my building. Naomi, I need to ask you something. Okay. This arrangement. We said 4 months. It's been 3 weeks, and already I can't imagine going back to however I existed before you started falling asleep on my couch and texting me terrible wine reviews. His voice was carefully controlled, but I heard the vulnerability beneath. What happens when the 4 months end? My heart was hammering. I don't know. We reassess. We see if this still makes sense. What if it makes more sense than it should? Then we figure it out together. No scripts, no arrangements. Just two people who accidentally like each other more than was strategically wise. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I can work with that. As he drove the remaining blocks to my building, I realized something had shifted tonight. We'd started this as a transaction, his family problem, my ex-boyfriend situation, a mutually beneficial arrangement with a clear expiration date. But somewhere between wine tastings and family dinners and falling asleep on his couch, we'd stopped performing for external audiences and started building something real. Something that terrified me precisely because it mattered. And I had no idea how to protect myself from complications when I was already 3 weeks invested in someone I was definitely, absolutely, catastrophically starting to care about. Month 2 brought complications I hadn't anticipated. Kazuki's mother started inviting me to events without him, clearly testing whether I could handle her world independently. I managed, barely, by treating each interaction like a particularly challenging wine presentation. Prepared, knowledgeable, refusing to apologize for existing. More concerning was how naturally we'd slipped into patterns that had nothing to do with our arrangement. Kazuki started keeping my favorite coffee at his penthouse. I kept a change of clothes there for nights when I stayed too late and couldn't face the subway home. We developed inside jokes about his mother's passive aggression and my catastrophic social anxiety. We stopped needing to coordinate our stories because we'd created a shared history that felt increasingly real. This is getting dangerous, Yumi observed during one of our rare lunches together. You realize that, right? You're falling for him. I'm not falling for him. The lie tasted bitter. We have an arrangement. It ends in 2 months. I'm just enjoying the experience while it lasts. Naomi, you spent 20 minutes last night explaining to me why Kazuki's preference for Barolo over Brunello reveals something profound about his personality. That's not casual enjoyment. That's analyzing someone like you're preparing to invest your entire emotional portfolio. She wasn't wrong, but acknowledging it felt like admitting defeat, like all my careful boundaries had been meaningless against the reality of someone who listened when I talked, who remembered small details, who never once made me feel like my knowledge was something to minimize. What am I supposed to do? I asked quietly. We have a contract, an end date. I can't just confess feelings and complicate everything. Why not? Maybe he's feeling the same way. Or maybe he'll think I'm trying to extend the arrangement beyond its intended scope. Maybe he'll feel obligated to let me down gently, and then the next 2 months will be awkward performed affection instead of whatever this has been. Yumi sighed. You know what your problem is? You're so afraid of rejection that you'd rather have something temporary and safe than risk asking for something permanent and real. She was right, of course, but being right didn't make vulnerability any less terrifying. The catalyst came unexpectedly, 3 days later. I was closing Chateau Noir when my phone rang. Kazuki, his voice tight with controlled tension. Are you alone? Yes, just finished inventory. Why? What's wrong? My mother knows. 3 words that made my blood run cold. She hired an investigator, found out we met at the auction, that there's no record of any private tastings before that night. She's concluded we're faking the entire relationship. My stomach dropped. What happens now? Family dinner tomorrow. She's planning to expose us publicly. Make an example of how I've been lying to manipulate her. His control was cracking slightly. Naomi, I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have been more careful. Stop. I cut off his spiral. This isn't your fault. We knew this was risky from the start. I locked the shop's front door, my mind racing. What's our play? We could confess. Tell her the truth, that it started as an arrangement but became something real. He paused. Or we could end it now. Clean break. You walk away before she can humiliate you in front of the entire family. Is that what you want? For me to walk away? Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, no. But I don't want to trap you in my family's dysfunction either. You didn't sign up for this level of complication. Kazuki. I leaned against the shop's window, watching evening foot traffic blur past. 3 months ago, I asked a stranger to help me avoid humiliation in front of my ex. You could have refused, could have walked away. But you offered me something more. A chance to feel powerful instead of pathetic, to stop apologizing for existing. I took a breath. So no, I'm not walking away. We face your mother together. Tell her whatever truth you're comfortable with. But I'm not abandoning you just because things got complicated. You're sure? I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Which was true. I'd never been more certain of anything despite my hands shaking. What time tomorrow? 7. I'll pick you up at 6:30. His voice had steadied slightly. Naomi, thank you for not running. Thank you for making me want to stay. After we hung up, I sat in the shop's dimness for a long time, processing. Tomorrow, Akiko Takahashi would attempt to dismantle our relationship in front of witnesses. Would try to prove I was just some opportunistic girl using her son for access to wealth and status. The accusation should have been insulting. Instead, it felt almost laughable. I'd gained nothing tangible from this arrangement beyond stress and complex feelings. No money, no social elevation, no strategic advantage. Just the dangerous realization that I'd accidentally found someone who made me feel seen in ways I'd never experienced. When Kazuki arrived the next evening, he looked like he was preparing for battle. Jaw tight, shoulders tense, wearing his control like armor. I answered the door in the navy dress I'd worn to our first family dinner, ready for war. "You look ready to face down an army," he observed. "I'm prepared to face down one very determined mother who thinks she's protecting you from an opportunistic gold digger." I grabbed my coat. Let's go prove her wrong, or right, or whatever truth we're telling tonight. The drive to his family's estate was quiet, both of us lost in preparation. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, Kazuki said, "If this goes badly, if she says things designed to hurt you, remember that her opinion doesn't define your worth." I know that. Intellectually, anyway. I squeezed his hand. Emotionally, I'm going to struggle not to internalize every criticism, but I'll survive. You'll more than survive. He pressed his forehead briefly against mine. You'll show her exactly why I chose you over every appropriate option she's ever presented. The dining room was set up like a tribunal. Akiko at the head of the table, Takeshi beside her looking uncomfortable, Hana watching with undisguised curiosity. And in the corner, a stranger, middle-aged, professional, clearly the investigator who'd exposed us. "Kazuki." Akiko's voice was cold. "Thank you for coming. And Miss Suzuki, how lovely of you to join us for what I expect will be a very enlightening evening." "Mother." Kazuki remained standing, his hand firm in mine. "If you have accusations to make them. Don't play games." "Very well." She gestured to the investigator. "Mr. Kimura has been quite thorough in his research. Would you care to share your findings?" The investigator produced a folder, began reciting facts with clinical precision. How Kazuki and I had met at the auction. How there was no prior record of us at any shared events. How our story about a private tasting 3 months earlier couldn't be corroborated by any staff or venue. How my financial situation suggested I'd have significant motivation to attach myself to someone of Kazuki's means. With each revelation, Akiko's expression became more triumphant. This was what she'd wanted. Proof her son was being deceived. Evidence to justify her disapproval. "Is any of this inaccurate?" she asked when the investigator finished. "Technically? No." Kazuki's voice was steady. "We did meet at the auction. Our relationship did begin more recently than we claimed, but you lied to me." Akiko's control cracked slightly. "You brought this girl into my home, had her play the devoted girlfriend, all while knowing it was a performance. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? How it looks to our friends, our associates?" "What's humiliating," I said quietly, surprised by my own voice, "is that you hired an investigator to spy on your son instead of simply asking him about his relationship. What's humiliating is that you're more concerned with appearances than with whether he's actually happy." "Happy?" Akiko turned her focus on me, laser sharp. "You think happiness matters when building a life, a legacy? You think romance trumps duty, compatibility, shared values? I think," I continued, my voice steadier now, "that you're terrified, that your son chose someone completely wrong by your standards, and it suggests everything you've built your identity on might not matter as much as you think it does." Silence. Absolute, crystallized silence. "You don't know what you're talking about," Akiko said, but her voice wavered slightly. "Don't I? You've spent this entire evening trying to prove I'm using Kazuki for money or status. But you know what I've gained from this relationship?" I met her eyes directly. Stress. Anxiety. Weekly dinners where you test me like I'm auditioning for a role I never wanted. Zero financial benefit. I still work 60-hour weeks at Chateau Noir because that's my passion, not being arm candy for a wealthy man. "Then why are you here?" she demanded. "Because your son asked me to help him avoid an arranged marriage that would have made him miserable. And somewhere in the process, I realized he's the first person in years who's made me feel like my expertise and intelligence matter more than my social performance." I glanced at Kazuki, whose expression had gone soft. So, yes, we lied about our timeline. We fabricated our meet cute. But what happened after? That's been entirely real. Akiko stared at me for a long moment. Then, "You're saying you actually care about him?" "I'm saying I came here tonight knowing you'd try to destroy me publicly, and I chose to face that rather than abandon him. Draw your own conclusions." More silence. Then Takeshi cleared his throat. "Akiko, the girl clearly isn't a gold digger. She's got more fire than any of the appropriate options you've been pushing. Maybe it's time to accept that our son chose someone based on actual compatibility instead of strategic advantage." "She lied to us," Akiko protested, but weakly. "We've all lied about more important things," Hana interjected. "At least this lie was in service of protecting Kazuki from a marriage he didn't want. That's more consideration than most appropriate matches would have shown." I watched Akiko process this, saw the exact moment her control reasserted itself. "Very well. You've made your point, Miss Suzuki. You're either genuinely attached to my son, or you're willing to weather significant discomfort for whatever this arrangement provides. Either way." She looked at Kazuki. "It's clear you've chosen her. I may not approve of how this relationship began, but I won't continue to interfere." It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was a truce. And given everything, that felt like victory enough. As Kazuki drove me home later, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he said, "You told my mother you care about me." "I did." "Did you mean it?" I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd spent 3 months showing up exactly when he promised, who'd protected me from his mother's worst impulses while never making me feel weak for needing protection, who'd learned my coffee preferences and texted me amusing incompetence and made space for me to exist without performing. "Yes," I said simply. I meant it. Every word. He pulled over, same spot where we'd stopped after our third family dinner. But this time, when he looked at me, there was no uncertainty. Just clarity. "Our arrangement was supposed to end in 6 weeks," he said. "What if we renegotiated?" "Renegotiated how?" "No end date, no performance, just us, figuring out what this actually is without scripts or deadlines." His hand found mine. "I know that's terrifying. I know it violates every boundary we established. But Naomi, I don't want to lose you when our contract expires. I want to keep this. Keep us." My heart was hammering. What if it doesn't work? What if we're better at performing than actually being together? Then we'll fail spectacularly, and at least we'll know we tried. He smiled slightly. "But I don't think we will. I think we've been accidentally good at this from the beginning. We just called it strategy instead of admitting what it actually was." "Which is?" "Two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who helped each other be braver than we thought we could be." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "Who accidentally fell for each other while pretending to be in love." I kissed him. Not performed, not strategic, just genuine, terrified, hopeful. When we broke apart, I was smiling despite my fear. "Okay," I said. "No more contracts, no more arrangements. Just us, figuring out whatever this is. Just us," he agreed. And for the first time since walking into that auction 3 months ago, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not because someone told me to be there, but because I'd chosen it myself. The next 6 months dissolved my certainty that I knew what love looked like. Not the performed version from our arrangement, but something messier, more complicated, infinitely more real. Kazuki was not an easy person to love. He worked too much, controlled too much, occasionally retreated into himself in ways I couldn't reach. But he was also unfailingly honest, reliably present, and showed affection through actions rather than words, stocking my favorite wine at his place, remembering the exact temperature I preferred for specific vintages, learning to read my anxiety tells, and creating space before I imploded. I was not an easy person to love either. I overthought everything, needed excessive reassurance, occasionally became so absorbed in wine research that I forgot to eat or sleep. But Kazuki never made me feel like my intensity was a burden. Just interesting. We told people the truth about how we met. The fake dating arrangement, the family manipulation, the accidental feelings. Most found it endearing. Yumi called it the most Naomi way possible to fall in love, strategically and by accident. Ken heard about it somehow, sent a message congratulating me with thinly veiled bitterness. I blocked him without responding, finally learning that some people deserved no space in my life. Everything was working. Everything was perfect. Then I missed my period. Not once, twice. The pregnancy test I took in Chateau Noir's bathroom during my lunch break showed 2 lines that made my vision tunnel. Positive. Unambiguously, terrifyingly positive. I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes trying to process. Kazuki and I had been careful. Not perfectly careful, obviously, given the evidence in my trembling hands. But we'd never discussed this possibility. Never talked about children or timelines or what we wanted beyond figuring out our relationship one day at a time. Naomi? Yumi's voice through the door. You've been in there 40 minutes. I'm coming in. She found me on the floor, the test still clutched in my hand. Her expression cycled through shock, concern, something close to joy before settling on practical concern. How pregnant? I don't know. 2 months maybe? I've been so busy I didn't notice. My voice cracked. Yumi, I can't have a baby right now. I'm 24. I'm finally building my career. Kazuki and I just figured out how to be together without contracts. This is going to ruin everything. Or, she said carefully, sitting beside me on the bathroom floor, it's going to complicate things, which is different from ruining them. How am I supposed to tell him? We've been together 6 months, only 3 of which were real. This is too much too fast. So don't tell him yet. Take a week. Confirm with a doctor. Figure out what you actually want before you involve him in the decision. That felt cowardly, but also necessary. I needed to know what I wanted before I could ask Kazuki what he wanted. I took a week, made a doctor's appointment that confirmed what I already knew. 10 weeks pregnant, due in late spring, perfectly healthy so far. I researched options with the same methodical precision I brought to wine analysis. Kept working, kept pretending everything was normal, kept showing up at Kazuki's penthouse and falling asleep on his couch, while my mind spiraled through every possible future. Finally, 8 days after that first positive test, I told him. We were at his place, sharing a bottle of Barolo. I'd had maybe 2 sips, pleading exhaustion, when I finally forced the words out. I'm pregnant. Kazuki went completely still, his wine glass frozen halfway to his mouth. For 5 full seconds he didn't move. Then, carefully, pregnant. 10 weeks. I took 4 tests to be sure. Saw a doctor. It's confirmed. My hands were shaking. I know this isn't what we planned. I know it's too soon and too complicated. And if you need time to process, are you keeping it? Not what do you want to do. Just asking my decision. I think so. Maybe. I don't know. I forced myself to meet his eyes. I'm terrified. I'm 24. I work 60 hours a week. I have no idea how to be a mother. But also, I stopped, trying to articulate the feeling I'd been wrestling with all week. Also, I can't quite imagine choosing otherwise. Okay. He set down his wine with deliberate care. Then we figure it out. We? You think I'm walking away because this is complicated? Naomi, my entire relationship with my family is complicated. You met that complication head-on and didn't flinch. You think I'm going to do less for our child? Our child. The way he said it, with certainty, not question, made my eyes burn. You're not angry? I'm terrified. I don't know how to be a father. My own father is barely present. His voice was controlled, but I heard the vulnerability beneath. But I know I don't want to do this without you. And I know that kid, our kid, is going to be brilliant, and probably anxiety-ridden, and absolutely devastating in the best possible way. I kissed him, tasting salt from tears I didn't remember shedding. When we broke apart, he was smiling slightly. We're doing this? I asked. We're doing this. Strategically and by accident, exactly like everything else in our relationship. 2 weeks later, his mother found out. Not through careful revelation, through Hana, who'd noticed I wasn't drinking wine at a family dinner and correctly deduced the cause. Akiko's reaction was complicated. Initial shock, followed by calculation, ending surprisingly in something close to approval. Well, she said, studying me across her pristine dining table. I suppose this makes the relationship permanent whether I approve or not. Mother, Kazuki warned, I'm not being cruel. I'm being realistic. She looked at me directly. You're young, Miss Suzuki. Unprepared for motherhood in many ways. But you're also stubborn, intelligent, and apparently unable to walk away from difficult situations. Those are decent qualities in someone raising my grandchild. It wasn't quite acceptance. But from Akiko Takahashi, it was close enough. The pregnancy progressed through spring with all the discomfort and wonder I'd feared and hoped for. I worked as long as Hiroshi would let me, then grudgingly accepted his suggestion to transition to consulting rather than floor work. Kazuki became obsessively protective, installing security systems I didn't ask for, researching pediatricians with disturbing intensity, learning to cook because apparently my diet of coffee and occasional meals wasn't adequate for growing our kid. Our kid isn't even here yet, and you're already impossible, I told him one evening, as he presented yet another meticulously researched option for cribs. Wait until they actually arrive. I'll be worse. He was right. When our daughter was born on a May evening that felt impossibly perfect, Kazuki held her with a reverence that made my chest ache. This man who controlled empires, who intimidated everyone he met, reduced to tears by 7 pounds of squirming infant. She's perfect, he whispered, tracing her tiny fingers. We made something perfect. We made something complicated, I corrected, exhausted and deliriously happy. She's going to be exactly as intense as I am and exactly as stubborn as you are. Terrifying. I can't wait. We named her Yuki, Snow, for the unexpected purity of something that changed everything, Yumi cried when we told her. Akiko actually smiled, a real smile, when she held her first grandchild. At 6 months postpartum, working from home as a wine consultant, I looked at my life and barely recognized it. I'd started with a desperate request to fake date a stranger, ended up with a partner who challenged me, protected me, loved me in ways I'd never imagined loving could look. Any regrets? Kazuki asked one evening. Both of us exhausted from Yuki's latest sleep regression, collapsed on his couch in the domestic chaos we'd created. About approaching a stranger at an auction and asking him to make my ex jealous. I thought about it honestly. Not one. Good. He pulled me closer, both of us too tired for anything beyond existing together. Because I have a confession. Oh no. What? I knew who you were before you crashed into me that night. I'd been to Chateau Noir twice, heard you explaining vintages to clients with this brilliant authority. When you asked me to help, I said yes because I'd been trying to figure out how to talk to you for weeks. I pulled back to stare at him. You're telling me this was premeditated? Partially. The family arrangement was real. The attraction was real. The strategic cooperation was real. But the moment you asked for help, I saw an opening. His smile was slight, almost shy. Sorry? You're not sorry at all. I'm really not. He kissed me softly. Would you have preferred the truth? Absolutely not. I would have panicked and fled. I settled back against him. This way I got to be brave by accident. You've always been brave. You just needed someone to notice. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic and possibility. Inside, our daughter slept in her nursery. Our life spread around us in comfortable chaos. And I realized that somewhere between asking a stranger to hold my hand and building a family with him, I'd stopped trying to make myself smaller. I'd learned to take up space, exactly as much as I needed, maybe even a little more.